Dr. Finn and Andre, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking time out to answer. We've got 3 questions from the audience from our very successful webinar, which you both delivered on understanding mental health in young people and children. So let's crack on. Children want to be included, not excluded, but how do we encourage them to be included when all their behaviour presents as leave me alone?
Great question. Dr. Finn, are you happy for me to start?
Absolutely, yeah.
So I love the word included and inclusion as a whole. And I think many of the children that we work with in our organisation, not only do they feel excluded from the school setting, but they feel excluded from society as a whole. And then that enables them to be susceptible to exploitation in various forms, finding peer groups who have similar traumatic experiences and bond through those traumatic experiences. So it's really thinking about you know, what does inclusion mean to that child or to children? What parts of their life do they feel included in? What areas do they feel included in? And, you know, looking at this, if it's a peer group, why does the peer group mean so much to you? Or if it's an after school activity, what does that do for you? If it's a specific part of their family system where they feel included, what does that mean to you? And why do you feel included within that part of the family system? And then that can start speaking to, why do you feel excluded from those same areas? Why do you feel excluded from some peers, from some parts of the family system, from other, settings outside of the family home? I don't think personally children want to be left alone. I think that they go through different phases and different moments in their adolescent development generally. I don't think they want to be excluded or left alone, as I said, but I think they need people to speak to those areas in their lives where they get something, you know, more than just being a physical person there. They're getting something emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, physically. So it's interrogating that and finding out, what does inclusion mean to you and where do you feel included? But consistency is another one. You know, if 1 week or 1 month or one part of the year they're not feeling so connected to their parents or to other professionals around them, allow them to have these phases, but everybody just be consistent. So when they return, they've always got that consistent voice, consistent face, and they'll come back. They will come back.
And just that, I think that's a beautifully done from a kind of societal and, you know, all these kind of other frames that surround children. And if we take it down to an individual level, I think this came up in the context of when we started talking about behaviour as an expression of emotion. And it's not uncommon that we see, particularly in looked after children or children who've been through early trauma, that their kind of internal physiological threat systems get raised when they feel more connected, because it's an unsafe place to be, or historically it's been an unsafe place to be. So it's not uncommon for children to want to push away and create that distance because it's threatening, but actually it's that Andre's talking to, that consistent presence is really important. So even if that doesn't mean physical connection for that child, in terms of they may not actually want to be hugged yet, it's building that relationship, it's having that presence in their lives and holding them in mind that will start to break down some of that behavior from kind of actually, if I have control and I create the distance, I feel safer than when I feel connected because of what my historical past has shown me. And then I think if you're talking about it, like Andre's saying, in different phases of life, so we've all got adolescents who enjoy time in their bedrooms on their, you know, whatever, with friends.
Yeah.
And that's fine. And they, like, I've got a teenage daughter who will always like say, no, I'm fine, I don't want to come down and watch TV with you or whatever. I think, like Andre's talking to, it's that consistency of, I'm here, I'm holding you in mind, I'm thinking about you, and if you ever kind of want to just reconnect from time to time, I'm absolutely here. But it's not assuming, I think it's taking that position of not assuming that just because they're in a teenage phase of kind of, you know, their connection is elsewhere, that they don't need you or don't want you anymore, even though their behaviour can kind of suggest that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Is all anxiety and depression that can occur with younger children a direct link with trauma within their living environments, or can it occur when they have had secure attachments and living situations?
Shall I go first on this one?
Yeah.
It's a really great question. And I think what it speaks to is being cautious around absolutes. So the research tells us that insecure attachments are a kind of risk factor within depression, anxiety, and all mental health conditions, actually. But that doesn't mean to say you cannot experience depression or anxiety within a secure attachment. We don't necessarily have control over what happens to our children as they grow. So that initial relationship and caregiving relationship is only one element of that, and we can't necessarily protect them from everything. I think where we tend to see differences is in the severity of experience. So if a younger person grows up with a secure attachment, there are two things that we tend to see. One is they tend to experience distress in less severe and less alarming physiological ways. And also they are more used to having and being able to rely on others to support. So they're better at communicating that with other people. So not only do you see a slightly less physiological impact of that distress, but you also tend to see a kind of better ability to kind of communicate and be heard about it. So I think there are layers, obviously, of risk factors, but when you've had trauma in your early life, that really does, create another layer of both the physiological response in relation to distress, but also the challenges in trusting the availability of other people to help you in certain situations. So on absolutes, it's not, just because you've had a secure environment doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to experience any mental health, but it's usually what we see at the milder end, and people are generally better at seeking support for it than when they've experienced early trauma and had, insecure attachments ongoingly.
Yeah, and I think just to add, the two words that really come up, or three words, is the rupture in certain relationships that children experience at a very young age. And if they haven't had a secure base or secure attachment, the repair in some of those relationships is a lot harder to do, building upon what Dr. Finn has said. So then those children, when they experience professionals, when they experience peers or etc., and those relationships are ruptured, it's harder for them to form those relationships with other people, to trust people again, because their early experiences of those secure attachments has been so difficult, has been so distressing for them. So I think there is something about children who come from stabilized environments, or whatever is a stabilized environment, an environment more stable than children who come from environments where there's more early traumatic experiences, more distress, more domestic violence, all those types of things. I think children who come from secure places can repair the relationships quicker. They can return back to what they find as their security. They can make meaning, make sense of things, as opposed to children who have had multiple experiences of trauma from a young age, multiple ruptured relationships. It just takes longer for them to recover. And it means that everybody in their world has to be, again, consistent, but recognize that from a very early age, their main caregivers, the main people that form those relationships, they didn't give the child the space to trust those relationships and believe in those relationships. And that plays out in their lives moving forward. So, children who come from stability, easier to repair the relationships. Children who come from traumatic experiences, it's much harder, in my experience.
Okay, thank you. And I guess for this parent, it sounds as if they're asking if the anxiety and depression their child's experiencing, they're kind of wondering where it's coming from. Do you agree?
I think you can. I always ask families and children to consider key moments within their personal lives where they notice behavioral change within the child, or where there were major things happening within the family that sometimes the family are unaware of the impact that will have on the child. But I'm always looking historically about what has shaped the present and what we're seeing. So things like anxiety, things like depression, and how it kind of arises and manifests in its behavior. I'm always asking why, how, where did it originate from? What was going on at the time? What was going on at the, that key developmental stage for the child? What was the parent mirroring to the child? What was happening in the wider family system? I'm always asking why. So that would be some of my advice. Just keep thinking about why and what happened at those times. And then that can open up discussions around how it's coming out in their behavior.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you both. Okay, so finally, how do I support my daughter who is too anxious for school? This is such a common, we're seeing a lot of this, a lot of parents are, the term school refusal has been it's become very popular, hasn't it? I don't know if popular is the right word, but yeah, we're hearing it a lot.
Yeah. Do you want to start with this, or shall I?
I'm happy to start. I mean, I'll approach from two ways. One is from a parent's view, as a parent, and then two as a practitioner. So as a parent, we recognize in our daughter that there are times that she wants to go to school, and there are times that she's, more cautious about entering the space. I think as parents and as adults, we think the school setting, between 8 till 4 or 9 to 5, whatever it is, it's a place of safety, or a place where they go to learn, or a place where they can have, interaction with peers and develop. But actually, some of these places are more unsettling than the home. There sometimes are teachers and professionals in there that consciously or unconsciously cause harm to children. There are some lessons that children just cannot cope in. Sometimes children are in classes of, as we know, of 30 plus. There are various dynamics happening with children on a day-to-day basis. And that alone speaks to, from my experience as a parent, the child cannot always articulate what's going on, but sometimes it causes resistance to want to go. I think as a practitioner, I'll say again that sometimes the school environment can be the riskiest time in a child's life. The journey to school, in school, and the journey home from school. And if they cannot articulate, or if they cannot get people to understand what's actually taking place for them, the school becomes a really distressing part of their life. So again, I'm always trying to ask questions with children or with my own child. What is happening for you? What does it feel like? Dr. Finn spoke about the physiological response. What's happening internally in your body when you cross the threshold or the boundary into school? What does it smell like for you? What does it feel like in your body? What does this lesson represent for you? What do these peers represent for you? What's happening on phones, on social media? And I'm trying to get almost like a chronology of the day to try and understand at these moments, where does your anxiety rise? Where do you feel less attached to relationships? What lessons trigger you? And that gives me an understanding of what the day can be. And then we try and think about ways to reduce that anxiety and try and see school as a place that can be positive. Not all parts of school be positive, but let's look at the positive aspects. That's where I would start.
And I think I come at this from a couple of angles as well. There are two things that we see a lot of in practice. One is, around 1 in 6 children are neurodiverse. So whether that's dyslexia, whether that's ADHD, whether that's ASD or autistic spectrum kind of conditions. When we start to see young people kind of feeling really anxious about being in school, it does feel quite correlated to when school gets increased. There's an increasing expectation of them within school. So primary, early years, generally those are kind of, there's less demand, there's more nurturance within the classroom. And then as they go up through the kind of middle childhood years, the demand increases. And that's where we start to see, actually, is there something about their experience of themselves as a learner that is really impacting their sense of self at school? So like Andrez said, they're in this environment 5 days a week, 8 till 4, 9 till 5, whenever it is. And if they are, we see so many young people with ADHD who have been able to kind of master to a certain extent at school, but are getting high levels of criticism from teachers about, their clumsiness, knocking pencils off the desk, or them wanting to put their hands up frequently because they've got the answer and they want to give it. And these are all things that are actually part of really great abilities within ADHD, but don't necessarily fit well in a neurotypical education system. So I would always ask, like Andrez says, why? Like, what is it that is making that an anxious environment? Could there be a neurodifference that is part of that? And the other thing I would say is that we also see an awful lot of young people coming through with anxiety post-COVID. So we've had an awful lot of children outside of a school environment, and it doesn't matter where that is in their educational journey. Those 2 years have had a huge impact on either their social anxiety or their sense of themselves as learners, or they've either been they've either started the school journey and it's those expectations are starting to increase, and then they've had, for some of them it's been a lovely environment at home. They haven't had the pressures, they haven't had the expectations, and then they're having to re-engage with it. For others, particularly for young people who are neurodiverse, did not engage well with online learning, missed a huge amount of their educational engagement, and then a kind of going back into school in senior years, kind of feeling like, just can't, I just don't know where to start, and it's completely understandable. So I would really kind of, it's really common for us. COVID has had a massive impact on young people's sense of themselves as learners. So yeah, unfortunately too common.
Okay. Thank you so much. That brings us to the end of that. So yeah, thank you.